All right, so are you ready for this? Today we're taking a deep dive into something that's, well, it's a pretty big deal for a lot of people.
Yeah, no kidding.
The second coming of Jesus Christ. We're looking at this excerpt, the second coming of Jesus Christ, a promise of hope and restoration. And, I think just hearing those words, second coming, it kind of conjures up all sorts of images.
Oh, yeah, totally.
So before we even get into what the source says, I'm curious, when you hear second coming, what pops into your head?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, it's always been this mix of anticipation and kind of a sense of mystery, like what's it actually going to be like?
Right. It's this huge event that, well, nobody really knows exactly how it's going to go down, but it's been a source of hope and also, honestly, fear for a long, long time.
Definitely. I think that tension is really at the heart of it. The source even talks about how this idea has permeated our culture. It's not just a religious thing.
Yeah, it's everywhere, right? Movies, books, art, even music, it's like this collective fascination. So let's dig into what the source actually says about the origins of this belief.
Okay, so the source really emphasizes how this idea didn't just come out of nowhere. It's rooted in the Old Testament, way back. You've got prophets like Daniel talking about a son of man coming on the clouds, and Isaiah with his vision of a future where there's no more war.
I see. So these prophets were already laying the groundwork.
Exactly. It's like they're pointing towards this messianic figure who's going to come and change everything.
So it's not just a New Testament thing, it's woven into the fabric of the Old Testament as well.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have Jesus himself talking about coming back in the Gospels, which solidifies this whole concept for Christians.
Right. And the source highlights this really important distinction between the two comings.
Yeah. Like Jesus' first coming, that was all about humility and service, meeting people where they were at. He was born in a manger, walked among the poor and the sick, ultimately gave his life for humanity. It was all about selflessness and love, right?
Exactly. But the second coming, that's described as something completely different.
Oh yeah, totally. Especially in Revelation, it's this powerful, almost kind of cosmic event. It's about judgment and, well, things getting set right. It's definitely a shift in tone.
Yeah.
Which actually leads us to something I found really interesting in the source. The purpose of the second coming. It lays it out in three main points.
Okay, let's hear it.
First, it's about fulfilling promises.
Right. God making good on his word, restoring creation, and establishing his eternal kingdom.
And that makes me think, what does fulfilling promises actually look like? I mean, across different Christian denominations, there are so many interpretations, right?
Oh, tons. And that's where things get really interesting. How literal is it? Is it symbolic? What promises are we even talking about? Lots of debate there.
That's a great point. The source acknowledges those different perspectives for sure. Okay, so fulfilling promises, check. But then there's that whole judgment and justice thing, that Jesus will judge the living and the dead, which I think for a lot of people is a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah. Trying to reconcile a loving God with divine judgment, that's a tough one. It's been debated for centuries. But the source, at least, it kind of frames judgment not as punishment, but as a way of, setting things right, restoring balance.
Okay, I can kind of see that.
Yeah.
Justice being served, ultimately. So we've got fulfilling promises, judgment, that's two, what's the third?
Redemption and restoration.
Ah, yes. This one really gets me thinking. The source talks about Revelation, a new heaven and new earth, and a world where there's no more pain, sorrow, or even death. I gotta say, that's hard to wrap my head around. No more suffering at all.
It is a big concept, right? I mean, we live in a world where pain and suffering are all around us, so to imagine a reality where that just doesn't exist.
It's almost unimaginable.
But the source presents it as this ultimate victory of good over evil. It's a reality where God's love just permeates everything and it heals all the brokenness. It's this incredible vision of hope, but I think it also serves as a call to action in the present. What can we do now to bring about a little bit of that redemption and restoration?
That's a great point. And speaking of action, the source definitely doesn't shy away from the signs and timing question.
Oh, yeah. Wars, natural disasters, people abandoning their faith. These are all presented as potential signs.
But then it throws in that curveball. The exact timing, nobody knows.
Well, yeah.
It's up to God.
Right, and it's that unknown that really makes you think. If you don't know when something's going to happen, how does that affect how you live your life now?
Exactly, and that's where interpretations get really diverse. Some people see it as a call to be constantly vigilant, ready to go at any moment, while others emphasize just living a life of love and service. regardless of when it all goes down.
Yeah, you see that a lot.
So it's not just about decoding the signs, it's about figuring out how this belief influences your daily life.
Absolutely. I mean, if you were living with the constant expectation that this event could happen like tomorrow, would you change anything about how you live? What would you prioritize?
Wow, that's a really thought-provoking question. And it's a personal one, for sure, but I think it gets to the heart of what the second coming really means for individuals.
Totally.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground. The biblical basis for the second coming, its significance, the whole mystery surrounding signs and timing, and that call to live in a state of readiness.
Lots to unpack.
But the source ends on this really powerful concept. It talks about God's kingdom values and how the world would be different if those values were actually reflected in our lives, you know?
And that's where the rubber meets the road, right? What are those values? Love, justice, compassion, peace. How do we translate those lofty ideals into real actions in our daily lives?
It's a big challenge, but I think it's one worth wrestling with. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the second coming of Jesus Christ, I want to leave you with this. If the world truly reflected those values, what would that look like? In your life, your community, even on a global scale, it's something for all of us to think about. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.